The Royal Mile is an important street going through the old town of Edinburgh. At the top, there's Edinburgh Castle, and at the very bottom, there's the Palace of Holyroodhouse. It was built in 1501 and is a listed building today. Shortly after the building of the palace, it evolved to be a popular place for councils and the Scottish Parliament. Later, they thought that it would be reasonable to make Holyrood Palace a royal residence, and shortly after, the palace consisted of royal chambers, a chapel, a big hall, and the northwestern tower. 1560, Mary Queen of Scots lived in this tower where she married Lord Darnley and witnessed the murder of her social secretary David Rizzio. Mary was 6 months pregnant with her son, later Jacob VI of Scotland, when Rizzio got murdered by henchmen sent by her jealous husband, who had heard rumors that Mary's baby wasn't his, but Rizzio's. Today, the Palace of Holyroodhouse is a mixture of Renaissance and Baroque architecture. Within the Act of Union between England and Scotland in 1707, it lost its importance, but there were still noble people living in it. Then the idea of the palace being a tourist attraction came up by the Duke of Hamilton, and he let visitors see the chambers where Mary Queen of Scots used to live in exchange for money. You can still go and see the insides of the palace today, but not when Queen Elizabeth II and her family are there.
St. Giles Cathedral, also known as the High Kirk of Edinburgh, had been destroyed and rebuilt many times. Because of one of the restorations, a part of the church had taken longer to rebuild and thus looks more modern than the other part, dividing the church into the Old Kirk and the New Kirk. When the movement of reform drew large crowds to St. Giles, separate services began to be regularly held in the both parts, meaning one service was for the Catholics and the other for the Presbyterians.
The Highlands. You can't visit Scotland without seeing these. They were settled by the Picts centuries ago and formed Scotland. During the Independence Wars, many clans united and fought against the English. At battles still known today, for example, the Battle of Stirling Bridge, where William Wallace defeated the English even though they were outnumbered. Until the 7th century, clans and warlords reigned over these lands and fought against invaders and amongst themselves. After the Union of Crowns in 1601, clans were forbidden and the lands were ruled from Edinburgh or from London. Today the land is still filled with ruins and castles from the early ages.
This dog, called Bobby, is very famous because of his loyalty. His master died when he was 2 years old, and he stayed at his grave for the other 14 years of his life. He only left his place when the people of the coffee house next to the graveyard gave him food. There is now a statue and a grave of Bobby himself in the graveyard called Greyfriars Kirkyard with the inscription, "Let his loyalty and devotion be a lesson to us all."
The Distillery is located in Perthshire in Scotland and used to be a cotton mill known as Deanston Mill. When the cotton industry declined, the mill had to close down because too many workers had left. But rather than seeing this as an end, they saw it as a new beginning to convert the mill into a distillery. And soon enough, they had made their own handcrafted Deanston Highland single malt Scotch whisky. For quicker fermentation, the distillery uses smaller barrels, because like that, the whisky has more surface contact with the wood, according to our tour guide. She proudly told us that they handcraft every drop of their organic whisky.
Scotland has gone through many different phases of fashion, and here are a few of them. Exoticism in the 16th century, where many Scottish people travelled around, led to an influence from foreign countries on Scottish clothing. The famous Scottish kilts also came up in the 16th century, and they are a symbol of Scottish patriotism. First, they were only worn by the Gaelic-speaking Highlandsmen, but later this trend spread all over Scotland. In the 18th century, the stomacher and the hoop petticoats became trends for women to show their prosperity. In the 19th century, it was trendy for men looking like gentlemen, for example, wearing a stovepipe hat. Women wore dresses with wide sleeves, and the hoop petticoats were replaced by so-called bustles. In the 20th century, women stopped wearing corsets and wore bras instead, like we know them today. Then women began to wear less dresses and more jumpers, like the Fair Isle jumper. Today there are pretty crazy dresses, like one which is made completely of airmail paper or another one which has butterfly wings on the back. Today's fashion is very colorful and even men are wearing makeup. The fancier, the better.
The Edinburgh Castle sits on Castle Rock at the west end of the Royal Mile. Castle Rock is made out of volcanic soil and was formed 350 million years ago. Over the ice ages, the soft soil around the rock was eroded by glaciers and left the rock nearly untouched. Because of many sieges, the castle was steadily upgraded and rebuilt. Its location was ideal. It covered the way up to the Highlands and thus was important to the Scots for keeping the English away. Over the ages, many battlements were added. In the 1800s, it was even used as a prison. The oldest buildings still standing are the Royal Chambers and the Great Hall. Today, it's a museum, displaying the Scottish crown jewels and the Scottish War Memorial. Every day at 1 o'clock, they fire a cannon. It was used to calibrate the clocks. If you want to visit the castle once, beware, the wind up there is terrible.
The Flodden Wall is an old city wall which was built after the Battle of Flodden in 1513 but wasn't completed until 1560. In the Battle of Flodden, Scotland lost 10,000 soldiers and their king died, and they were scared that the English may attack again. So the wall was built around 3 sides of Edinburgh. On the 4th side there was the Lake Nor Loch, which protected the city as well. Later on, the wall was more of a problem. The population of Edinburgh grew rapidly, and because of the Flodden Wall, the city couldn't expand. In order to have enough space for all those people, they started building very high multi-story houses, which were up to 14 stories high. You could call them the ancestors of skyscrapers today.